The Clash of Honor, Knights and Samurai. The clash of steel rings through the air as two warriors face each other in mortal combat. One, a European knight in gleaming plate armor, raises his longsword in salute. The other, a Japanese samurai in lacquered armor, bows slightly, his katana held at ready. Though separated by vast oceans and centuries of history, these two figures share a common thread. They both lived and died by strict codes of honor that would shape their respective civilizations for centuries to come. But beneath the surface of these seemingly similar warrior codes lies a fascinating tale of contrast, one that reveals how two great civilizations developed radically different views of honor, loyalty, and what it means to live and die with dignity. Picture this. The year is 1182, and two very different scenes are unfolding across the world. In England, a knight refuses to strike his opponent who has lost his weapon in a tournament, helping him back to his feet instead. Meanwhile, in Japan, a samurai methodically prepares for ritual suicide after his lord's defeat, believing that following his master in death is the ultimate expression of loyalty. These two moments capture the essence of how differently East and West came to view the warrior's path. For the medieval knight, honor was a public performance, a demonstration of virtues like mercy, courtly love, and Christian charity. For the samurai, it was an intensely personal commitment to absolute loyalty and the unflinching acceptance of death. Let's start with a striking example that perfectly illustrates this contrast. In 1203, the French knight Guillaume de Barres was praised throughout Europe for sparing the life of his opponent in a judicial duel, showing mercy despite having the right to execute him. In the same decade, the Japanese samurai Minamoto no Yoshitsune faced a similar choice with his defeated opponent, but chose a very different path. He granted his rival's request for an honorable death by beheading, seeing this not as cruelty, but as the highest form of respect one warrior could show another. The origins of these codes reveal even more about their fundamental differences. Chivalry emerged in the 11th century as the church tried to tame the violence of European knights by channeling their aggression into Christian ideals. A knight was expected to be not just a warrior, but a gentleman, protecting the weak, honoring women, and showing mercy to defeated foes. The code was as much about peacetime behavior as it was about combat. Bushido, on the other hand, developed in a Japan that was largely isolated from external religious influence. While Buddhism and Confucianism played their parts, the core of Bushido was shaped by the unique political structure of Japanese feudalism. A samurai's supreme virtue was unwavering loyalty to their lord, even, or especially, in death. The concept of death itself reveals perhaps the starkest contrast between these codes. Medieval Christian knights saw death in battle as a path to martyrdom and heavenly glory, but they were expected to fight to live and triumph. The very idea of ritual suicide would have been abhorrent to them, a mortal sin that would deny them salvation. Yet, in Bushido, the willingness to die at any moment was seen as the ultimate liberation. The famous saying, "The way of the samurai is found in death," would have bewildered a European knight. The ritual of seppuku, ritual suicide, was seen as the purest expression of honor, a way to take control of one's death and transform defeat into a kind of victory through the demonstration of absolute self-control. These differences played out in fascinating ways on the battlefield. European knights developed elaborate rules of engagement, especially concerning the taking of high-born prisoners for ransom. Capture wasn't seen as shameful. It was simply part of the game of war, and a captured knight could preserve his honor by paying his ransom and returning to fight another day. In Japan, capture was seen as the ultimate disgrace. A samurai was expected to fight to the death or commit suicide, rather than face the dishonor of surrender. This led to radically different military tactics and outcomes. European battles often ended with negotiated surrenders and exchanges of prisoners, while Japanese conflicts frequently concluded in mass suicides of defeated warriors. But the differences between these warrior codes went far beyond the battlefield. They shaped every aspect of daily life, from social interactions to art and literature, creating ripples that we can still feel today. Consider how each culture approached the concept of love and relationships. European knights developed the tradition of courtly love, where a knight would pledge himself to a noble lady, often not his wife, and perform great deeds in her name. This romantic ideal gave us the archetype of the knight-errant fighting for love and glory, which still influences Western romance stories today. In stark contrast, samurai culture viewed emotional attachments as potential weaknesses. While samurai did marry and have families, their emotional lives were strictly governed by duty and obligation. The famous story of the 47 Ronin illustrates this perfectly. When forced to choose between avenging their lord and caring for their families, they chose revenge, knowing it meant certain death and leaving their families behind. The tale of Sir Thomas Malory, who wrote La Morte d'Arthur while imprisoned, and Yamamoto Tsunetomo, who authored Hagakure in monastic seclusion, provides another fascinating parallel. Malory's work celebrates the pageantry of knighthood and the grand adventures of noble warriors. Tsunetomo's book, written a few centuries later, is a stark meditation on death and loyalty that would seem alien to Malory's knights. Let's examine a day in the life of each warrior type. A medieval knight would spend his mornings practicing weapons, but his afternoons might be devoted to falconry, poetry, or dancing, all considered essential knightly accomplishments. He would dine in great halls, participate in tournaments, and engage in courtly intrigue. A samurai's day was markedly different. While they also practiced martial arts, they devoted equal time to spiritual and artistic pursuits like calligraphy, tea ceremony, and meditation. These weren't mere pastimes, but integral parts of their warrior training, teaching the focus and discipline needed to face death at any moment. The way each warrior class dealt with failure reveals another crucial difference. When a medieval knight failed in his duties, he could seek redemption through confession, penance, and great deeds. The concept of redemption was central to the Christian framework of chivalry. Consider the story of Sir Gawain, who failed a test of virtue but was forgiven and learned from his mistake. For samurai, failure often meant only one honorable choice: death. The practice of seppuku wasn't just about avoiding capture. It was seen as a way to erase shame and restore honor. When the samurai Torii Modotada's castle was about to fall in 1600, he composed a calm and thoughtful death poem before committing ritual suicide, an act that would have seemed incomprehensible to a European knight. This brings us to perhaps the most significant difference in how these codes shaped their societies, their relationship with power and authority. European chivalry, while emphasizing loyalty to one's lord, also promoted individual glory and the pursuit of personal honor. Knights could and did switch allegiances without losing their status as knights, particularly if their lord broke faith with them first. The samurai code, however, placed absolute loyalty to one's lord above all else. The individual samurai's honor was inseparable from their loyalty to their master. This fundamental difference helped shape Japan's hierarchical corporate culture and Europe's more individualistic society. Even their approaches to peace were drastically different. When not at war, European knights were expected to channel their martial spirit into tournaments and quests, creating a culture of individual achievement and public spectacle. These tournaments were grand social events where knights could demonstrate their prowess without bloodshed. Samurai, during peaceful times, were more likely to focus on internal cultivation through arts like tea ceremony and rock gardening. These practices weren't just peaceful alternatives to war. They were seen as different expressions of the same warrior spirit. The precision and discipline required to perform a tea ceremony perfectly was considered as much a part of Bushido as swordsmanship. These ancient warrior codes might seem like relics of a distant past, but their influence continues to shape both Eastern and Western societies in surprisingly modern ways. The echoes of these medieval value systems can be found in everything from corporate culture to popular entertainment. Consider how modern Japanese business culture reflects many core principles of Bushido. The famous loyalty of Japanese workers to their companies, even at the cost of personal sacrifice, mirrors the samurai's dedication to their lord. When Japanese executives take responsibility for company failures by resigning and apologizing publicly, they're following a tradition that can be traced directly back to the samurai concept of honor and accountability. In contrast, Western business culture, with its emphasis on individual achievement and entrepreneurship, reflects the more individualistic aspects of chivalric tradition. The modern Western CEO, like the knight of old, is often celebrated as a bold individual leader rather than a servant of the organizational hierarchy. Even modern military and leadership traditions show this divide. Western military academies often emphasize individual initiative and heroic leadership, much like the knights of old. Japanese self-defense forces, while thoroughly modern, still maintain some aspects of Bushido's emphasis on collective responsibility and absolute loyalty to the unit. The influence of these warrior codes extends far beyond the business and military worlds. Look at how differently East and West often approach the concept of heroism in popular culture. Western superhero movies typically celebrate individual heroes who stand out from society, much like the knight-errant of medieval tales. Japanese manga and anime more often focus on heroes who sacrifice themselves for the greater good, reflecting the samurai's emphasis on duty over individual glory. Even in sports, these cultural differences persist. Western athletes often celebrate individual achievements with dramatic gestures, while Japanese athletes tend to emphasize team harmony and modest responses to victory. The American baseball player pointing to the sky after a home run and the Japanese player bowing to the crowd after the same feat represent this continued cultural divide. But perhaps the most profound modern legacy of these warrior codes lies in how they continue to influence concepts of personal honor and responsibility. In the West, personal reinvention is celebrated. The idea that one can fail, learn, and try again is deeply ingrained in the culture, much like the knight's quest for redemption. In Japan, the stakes of personal failure remain higher, with cultural expectations often pushing individuals toward perfectionism and an all-or-nothing approach to success. What's particularly fascinating is how these ancient codes have adapted to modern sensibilities while retaining their core principles. The samurai's emphasis on mindfulness and focusing on the present moment has found new life in corporate mindfulness programs. The chivalric ideal of protecting the weak has evolved into modern Western concepts of corporate social responsibility and philanthropic obligations of the wealthy. As we've seen throughout this exploration, neither code was simply about fighting. They were complete philosophical systems for living. Their differences reflect the unique historical and cultural contexts that produced them, and their enduring influence shows how deeply medieval warrior values have been woven into the fabric of modern societies. These codes continue to offer valuable insights for our modern world. The samurai's emphasis on self-discipline and mindfulness speaks to our need for focus in an increasingly distracted world. The knight's ideals of defending the weak and standing up for justice remain powerful models for ethical leadership. As we face modern challenges that would have been unimaginable to both samurai and knights, perhaps we can learn from both traditions. The Western knight's adaptability and individual initiative, combined with the samurai's discipline and dedication to duty, might offer a powerful template for modern leadership and personal development. In the end, both Bushido and chivalry remind us that how we fight our battles, whether in the boardroom or on the battlefield, matters less than why we fight them and what principles we're willing to live and die for. The codes of these ancient warriors, though born in times of sword and armor, continue to offer guidance in our modern age of keyboards and smartphones. Their lasting influence proves that while technology and societies may change, the fundamental questions of honor, duty, and purpose remain as relevant as ever. Thank you for watching this exploration of these fascinating warrior codes. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the cultural differences between East and West, please consider subscribing to our channel for more content about Japanese history and culture. Don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, sayonara.